London. For centuries, it had been one of the world's greatest cities, a place where history, industry, and millions of lives came together beneath a skyline shaped by coal smoke and towering chimneys. By the winter of 1952, more than 8 million people called London home. Factories worked day and night. Power stations burned enormous quantities of coal to keep the city alive. Almost every house relied on coal fires for heat during the freezing winter months. Smoke rising from thousands of chimneys had become such a familiar sight that most Londoners barely noticed it anymore. Fog was equally familiar. For generations, thick winter fogs had drifted across the River Thames, covering streets and buildings in a gray veil. The people of London even had a nickname for these foggy days. They called them pea soupers because of their thick yellowish color. Normally, life continued without much concern. Buses kept running, shops remained open, children walked to school. The fog was simply another part of everyday life. But December of 1952 would be different, far different. On the evening of December 4th, a powerful high-pressure weather system settled over southern England. The air became unusually still. There was almost no wind. Instead of carrying smoke away from the city, the atmosphere trapped it close to the ground. With temperatures dropping below freezing, families across London added even more coal to their fireplaces. Factories continued producing smoke. Power stations released even more pollution into the air. Hour after hour, the smoke had nowhere to go. It slowly mixed with the natural winter fog. At first, almost no one noticed anything unusual. The streets simply looked a little grayer than normal. But by the following morning, the fog had grown thicker. Much thicker. Few people realized they were no longer breathing ordinary fog. An invisible mixture of soot, sulfur dioxide, and toxic particles was beginning to surround the entire city. Within hours, London would disappear beneath one of the deadliest clouds in modern history. By the morning of December 5, 1952, London had become almost unrecognizable. A thick yellow-gray fog covered every street, every bridge, and every neighborhood. At first, many people believed it was just another winter fog. After all, London had experienced dense fog countless times before. But this time, something felt different. The air carried a strong smell of burning coal. It irritated people's eyes. Every breath left a burning sensation in their throats. Visibility continued to shrink throughout the day. Soon, drivers could barely see a few meters ahead. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Red double-decker buses, normally the heartbeat of London's streets, were forced to stop because drivers could no longer see the road. Taxi drivers abandoned their routes. Police officers used flashlights to guide pedestrians through busy intersections. Some people walked with one hand against the walls of buildings, afraid they would lose their way. Even familiar streets became impossible to recognize. Streetlights glowed as faint orange circles floating inside the darkness. Buildings disappeared completely behind the toxic haze. From only a short distance away, Big Ben itself seemed to vanish. The fog grew so dense that people reported being unable to see their own feet while walking. Inside theaters, audiences could no longer see the stage. Cinema projectors shone into a wall of yellow smoke instead of onto the screen. Performances were canceled. Sporting events came to a halt. Flights arriving at London's airports were diverted or grounded. Even boats navigating the River Thames struggled to move safely through the darkness. Yet despite the growing chaos, most Londoners continued with their daily routines. No public health warning was issued. Schools remained open. Businesses continued operating. Few people understood that every breath they took carried millions of microscopic particles deep into their lungs. The danger wasn't something they could see. It was something they were breathing. And while the city struggled to function, hospitals were beginning to receive an alarming number of patients. The worst was still to come. As the smog refused to lift, London's hospitals began to fill at an alarming rate. Patients arrived one after another, all suffering from the same frightening symptoms. Persistent coughing, severe shortness of breath, burning eyes, crushing chest pain. Doctors had seen respiratory illnesses before, especially during the winter, but nothing like this. Entire families were becoming sick at the same time. Children struggled to breathe. Older adults were collapsing in their homes. Patients with asthma, bronchitis, and heart disease deteriorated rapidly. Hospital wards became overcrowded as physicians worked around the clock, trying to save as many lives as possible. Outside, the city remained trapped beneath the poisonous cloud. Ambulances moved slowly through the streets, their drivers relying on memory and dim headlights that barely pierced the thick haze. In some neighborhoods, visibility dropped to less than a single meter. Emergency crews often had no choice but to leave their vehicles behind and continue on foot. Inside homes, the situation was no better. The smog seeped through cracks around doors and windows, filling living rooms, bedrooms, schools, and offices. Closing the windows made little difference. The toxic air had already entered every corner of the city. People wrapped scarves around their faces, hoping they would help. But the microscopic particles passed straight through the fabric. Every breath carried soot, sulfur dioxide, and acidic pollutants deep into the lungs. Many Londoners believed the fog would disappear the next morning. Instead, each day looked exactly like the last. Gray skies, invisible streets, air that burned with every breath. By now, death notices were appearing across the city. At first, officials believed the unusually cold weather was responsible. But as the number of deaths continued to rise, it became impossible to ignore a disturbing pattern. Nearly every victim had been exposed to the same air. The city wasn't facing an epidemic. It wasn't under attack. London itself had become the weapon. Then on December 9th, after 5 days of darkness, the weather finally changed. A fresh wind swept across the capital, slowly. The thick yellow fog began to disappear. Sunlight returned. The streets became visible once again. But what the smog left behind would shock an entire nation. When the skies finally cleared, many Londoners believed the nightmare was over. The familiar landmarks of the city slowly reappeared. Traffic resumed. Shops reopened. Children returned to school. Life seemed to be returning to normal. But inside hospitals, the crisis was far from over. Patients continued arriving for days after the smog had disappeared. Many who had survived the worst of the fog were now suffering from severe lung infections, respiratory failure, and heart complications. Doctors were puzzled. How could people still be dying if the fog was gone? The answer was hidden inside their lungs. During those 5 days, millions of microscopic particles had been inhaled by nearly everyone in the city. The damage didn't stop when the air became clear. For many victims, it had only just begun. Every day brought new reports of unexpected deaths. Entire families mourned loved ones who had appeared healthy only a week earlier. Newspapers began asking difficult questions. Had this been a natural disaster, or had it been entirely preventable? Government officials faced growing pressure to explain what had happened. Medical experts, scientists, and public health authorities launched one of the largest environmental investigations Britain had ever seen. They collected hospital records, weather observations, air quality measurements, death certificates, and witness accounts from across London. Piece by piece, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The weather had played an important role, but the weather alone had not killed thousands of people. The real culprit was the enormous amount of pollution produced by the city itself. Coal smoke from homes, factories, power stations, all trapped beneath a rare atmospheric inversion that prevented the toxic gases from escaping. The fog had not been the disaster. It had simply become the prison that held the pollution over London. For the first time, Britain was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The greatest threat had not come from nature. It had come from the air its own people had created. The investigation was only beginning. Its conclusions would forever change the way the world thought about pollution. The deeper investigators looked into the disaster, the more disturbing the truth became. The Great Smog had not been a random tragedy. It had been the result of decades of unchecked pollution meeting the perfect weather conditions. Scientists analyzed thousands of medical records from hospitals across London. They compared death certificates with weather reports, pollution measurements, and air quality data collected during the 5-day event. The evidence pointed in one direction. The victims had not died because of the fog itself. They had died because the fog had trapped enormous concentrations of toxic pollutants at street level: sulfur dioxide, soot, smoke from millions of tons of burned coal. These invisible particles entered deep into the lungs, inflamed the airways, and dramatically reduced the body's ability to absorb oxygen. For people already suffering from asthma, bronchitis, pneumonia, or heart disease, the consequences were devastating. But healthy adults were also affected. No one was completely safe. Initially, officials estimated that around 4,000 people had died because of the smog. It was already considered one of the worst public health disasters in British history. But as researchers continued their work over the following months, a much larger tragedy came into focus. Many victims had survived the fog itself, only to die days or even weeks later from complications caused by the polluted air. Modern scientific studies now estimate that approximately 12,000 people lost their lives as a direct or indirect consequence of the Great Smog. More than 100,000 others suffered serious respiratory illnesses. The disaster shocked the British public. For years, smoke-filled skies had been accepted as the price of industrial progress. Now, that belief was collapsing. Newspapers demanded answers. Doctors called for immediate reforms. Scientists warned that another tragedy could happen at any time if nothing changed. The government could no longer dismiss the disaster as an unfortunate weather event. The evidence was overwhelming. Human pollution had turned an ordinary winter fog into one of the deadliest environmental disasters of the 20th century. The question was no longer what had happened. The question was whether Britain was willing to change. The Great Smog lasted only 5 days, but its impact would be felt for generations. The disaster forced Britain to confront a reality that could no longer be ignored. The air people breathed every day had become a serious threat to public health. For decades, coal had powered the country's homes, factories, and economy. It fueled the Industrial Revolution and helped transform Britain into one of the world's leading nations. But the events of December 1952 revealed the hidden cost of that progress. Thousands of lives had been lost, not because of war, disease, or natural disaster, but because of pollution. Public outrage continued to grow. Scientists urged immediate action. Doctors warned that another tragedy was inevitable unless the government acted. Their warnings were finally heard. In 1956, the British Parliament passed the Clean Air Act. The new law introduced smoke control areas, encouraged cleaner fuels, and placed strict limits on the burning of coal in urban neighborhoods. It became one of the most influential environmental laws of the 20th century. Over the years, London's skies slowly changed. The thick yellow-black smog that had once covered the city became increasingly rare. Cleaner heating systems replaced millions of coal fires. Industrial emissions were reduced. Air quality improved dramatically. The Great Smog also transformed the way the world understood pollution. It proved that environmental disasters do not always arrive with explosions, earthquakes, or floods. Sometimes, they build slowly, one chimney at a time, one factory at a time, one ordinary day after another, until the consequences become impossible to ignore. More than 70 years later, the Great Smog remains one of the clearest reminders that the air we cannot see can still determine the fate of millions. Today, many cities around the world continue to battle dangerous levels of air pollution. Although technology has improved and environmental regulations have become stronger, the lessons of London remain as relevant as ever. History often remembers the loudest disasters, the explosions, the shipwrecks, the wars, but some of history's deadliest tragedies arrived in complete silence. In December 1952, London disappeared beneath a cloud. When the skies finally cleared, thousands of lives had already been lost. The fog was gone. Its lesson never should be. Thank you for watching Forgotten Files. If you enjoy exploring forgotten disasters, historical mysteries, and the true stories that changed our world, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next chapter of history.